Welcome back to the deep dive. I um I have to say, when I first looked at the stack of research for today, I genuinely thought I had grabbed the wrong folder.
Oh, yeah. It reads like an engineering manual at first glance.
Right, it really does. I'm seeing all these terms like load-bearing walls and architectural integrity, failure states, risk mitigation protocols. I mean, it reads like a guide for building a suspension bridge in like a high wind zone.
It totally does, but then you flip to the title page.
Yeah, and the title is The Architecture of Digital Agency: OnlyFans, Innocence, and Structural Power. It's just a jarring combination of words, because we usually treat adult content creation as, you know, a moral issue or maybe financial one or a pop culture thing.
Yeah.
We rarely treat it as an engineering problem.
Which is exactly why this source material is so fascinating. And just to set the baseline here, we aren't here to debate the ethics of the industry. We're not taking sides on whether it's morally good or bad or right-wing or left-wing. That is a completely different show. This document is strictly a systems analysis. It argues that high-stakes digital environments, specifically adult content creation, function like hazardous jobs. So think deep-sea welding or bomb disposal.
That is a very vivid comparison.
Hmm?
And the core thesis here is that the damage people often suffer in this industry, the burnout, the shame, the ruined reputations, it isn't actually about the sex, it's about the structure.
Exactly. The text makes a really bold claim. It says the difference between empowerment and erosion is architecture.
Architecture.
Yeah, it's proposing that losing your innocence or destroying your future isn't an inevitable outcome of the work. It's a failure of design. If you walk into a hazardous environment without a protective suit, you get burned. But if you build the right suit, the right architecture, you can theoretically walk through the fire and come out intact.
Okay, so our mission today is basically blueprinting that suit. For you listening, we are going to break down what the source calls the reality principle, which is a wake-up call about the internet. Then we're going to redefine innocence in a way that I honestly found super surprising. And finally, we're going to walk through the three-pillar protection model.
And I'd argue that model is essential for anyone with a digital footprint, honestly, not just creators. But we really have to start with the cold water, which is the reality principle.
Yeah, the document opens with a bit of a slap in the face.
Yeah.
It literally just says, no issues is unrealistic.
This is where most people fail before they even upload a single file. There is this huge fantasy, especially among younger people entering the creator economy, that they can just dip a toe in, make some quick cash, and face zero consequences.
They think they'll be the exception.
Exactly. The source calls this the zero-risk fantasy. The reality principle states that in any high-stakes digital environment, risk is not just a possibility you might avoid. It's a feature of the system.
And it lists 4 specific risks that it claims are inevitable. Not probable, but inevitable. Reputational risk, psychological influence, financial complexity, and the big one, digital permanence.
Let's camp on digital permanence for a second, because I really think our brains aren't evolved to understand it. We say the internet is forever like it's a cute cliche, but this document treats it as a physics equation. Once data is released, it enters a state of uncontrollable replication. There is no eraser button.
So the source is essentially suggesting you have to assume the worst-case scenario before you even start.
Precisely. You have to assume your grandmother will see it. You have to assume your future boss will find it. If you build your plan on the hope that maybe nobody will notice, you've already failed the architectural test. The goal shifts from zero risk, which is impossible to controlled exposure.
You move from being a victim of the hazard to a manager of it.
Exactly.
Okay, that brings us to how this text defines innocence. Because traditionally, innocence implies being naive or chaste or just not knowing how the world works. But if you're operating under the assumption that your grandmother is going to see your explicit content, that doesn't sound very innocent.
That's because we're used to defining innocence morally. This text defines it structurally. It calls innocence structural integrity.
Like a building.
Right, just like a building. A bridge has integrity. If it holds together under the weight of traffic, it doesn't buckle. A person has innocence in this framework if their internal self remains coherent and unbroken, regardless of what they're doing with their body. The quote that really stood out to me was, "The body itself does not remove innocence. Loss of agency does."
Okay, let's dig into that. Agency is a word we hear thrown around a lot, but in this specific context, what does a loss of agency actually look like? Is it just being coerced or forced to do something?
Coercion is the obvious one, sure, but the text identifies much more subtle and insidious ways we lose agency. For example, it lists self-betrayal.
What does that look like in practice?
That's the moment when your gut screams, don't do this, but you do it anyway because the price is right. That right there is a structural crack in your psyche. Then there's dissociation. If you have to mentally leave your body or float away or numb yourself with substances just to perform the work, you have lost structural integrity. You are fragmenting.
And there was one more that I think applies to literally everyone on social media, commodifying self-worth.
Oh, that is the ultimate trap. The moment you tie your sense of, am I a good person or do I matter, to a metric, whether that's OnlyFans tips or Instagram likes or LinkedIn engagement, you have handed the keys to your house to strangers.
You're just outsourcing your self-esteem.
Exactly. You're no longer safe because your internal stability depends on external validation. That is the true loss of innocence the text is warning about. It's not about nudity. It's about giving away your internal power.
Now, usually when people defend this kind of work, they go straight to the nature argument. They'll say, we're all born naked, it's natural, shame is just a social construct.
Yeah.
And the source actually brings this up as the biological baseline.
It does. It acknowledges that biologically a naked body is completely neutral. A lion isn't ashamed. Early humans weren't ashamed. Shame is software, it's not hardware.
Right.
So in a vacuum, selling images of the body isn't inherently corrupting because the body is just biology.
And this is a massive, but we do not live in a vacuum. We live in a society filled with symbols.
Right. The text warns against the naturalistic fallacy. Just because something is natural doesn't mean it's socially safe. We are symbolic creatures. In our culture, nakedness implies vulnerability. Sex implies intimacy or possession. You can't just tell your boss or your future father-in-law, hey, biologically my content is neutral.
Yeah, I can't imagine that argument flying at Thanksgiving dinner.
No, it falls flat because we live in an ecosystem of reputation and hierarchy. If you ignore the social symbolism and rely entirely on the idea that it's just a body, you will get crushed by the social consequences. The text is very clear on this. You have to manage the symbols, not just the biology.
So we have this really intense tension here. On one hand, you want to maintain your internal integrity. On the other, you're navigating this minefield of social stigma and digital permanence. How do you actually survive this? Which is where the document pivots to the practical stuff, the three-pillar protection model.
This is the engineering manual part. And I have to say, Pillar 1 is something I wish every freelancer or public facet understood, regardless of what industry they're in.
So Pillar 1 is identity separation.
And this isn't just picking a fun stage name. This is a hard fork of your existence.
A hard fork, like in crypto.
Very similar concept. You are literally splitting the chain. The text advises creating a fully distinct legal and psychological entity. That means separate banking, separate email accounts, separate phone numbers, even separate physical devices if you can afford it.
I'll admit the banking part seemed like a massive hassle to me at first. Like, why does it matter if the money goes into your main checking account if it's all yours anyway?
Because it matters psychologically. The text says power comes from separation. If you see your legal name on a transaction, or if you use your personal rent money to buy business props, you're blending the worlds. But if you see an LLC or a business entity on the bank statement, it constantly reminds you that this is a job. It creates a mental firewall.
It also mentions a strict rule, which is no crossover with personal social life.
That is absolutely non-negotiable. You never follow your real-life friends from your creator account. You never check up on your ex. The absolute second you let your real life bleed into the persona, you open the door for all the chaos to enter your actual home.
Which leads right into Pillar 2. And I think this is probably the hardest one to execute because it seems to go against the very nature of the platforms. Pillar 2 is emotional detachment.
It really is the paradox of the industry. Platforms monetize intimacy, they sell the girlfriend experience, but the source argues that the creator must never actually feel that intimacy. The mantra has to be business, not intimacy.
But isn't that kind of fake? If you're selling intimacy but staying detached, aren't you just lying to the audience?
You're performing. And the text argues that you have to view it as a performance, exactly like an actor on a stage. The danger zone is when the creator starts enjoying the validation from the customers too much.
There was a specific prohibition under this pillar that really stood out to me. It said, no revealing personal vulnerabilities for tips.
That is the hard red line. The moment you sell your actual sadness or your actual secrets or your real-life drama for money, you have crossed a boundary you cannot uncross. You are selling your inner reality rather than just images of your body.
And the text warns that if you do that, Leverage collapses.
because you become dependent on the customer for emotional support. Imagine you're having a bad day, so you log on to get compliments to feel better. Now the customer owns you. You need them to feel okay. That is a catastrophic failure of architecture. You have to
Ooh.
be friendly and engaging and seemingly intimate while maintaining this internal fortress of this is not my real life.
So you're an actor who also handles their own accounting. But even the best actors need to know when the play is over. Which brings us to pillar 3, the exit strategy.
I see this in startups all the time, actually. People start a company or a side hustle with absolutely no definition of what done looks like. In the adult industry, the source argues this is fatal.
Why fatal?
Because of drift. That's the specific term it uses. You start doing it for a few months to pay off a student loan. Then the money gets good. Then you upgrade your apartment. Now you need the money to pay the new rent. Suddenly it's 5 years later, you're totally burned out, your privacy is gone, and you don't know how to stop because your lifestyle has inflated to match the income.
So the document suggests setting the exit criteria before you upload the very first photo.
Yes. You need 3 distinct things. A duration, like I will do this for exactly 18 months. A financial target, I will stop when I hit $50,000. And a hard end date. You have to turn it into a project with a deadline rather than a new lifestyle.
It strikes me that all 3 of these pillars, the identity separation, the emotional detachment, and the exit strategy, they're all about preventing the work from becoming who you are.
Precisely. It's about keeping the you distinct from the product. If the product fails or if people hate the product, you are still perfectly fine.
But how do you know if it's working? I mean, you can build all these walls, but how do you know if you're actually safe inside them? The text offers a diagnostic tool for this, a way to check your structural integrity. It calls it the long-term identity stability test.
I love this concept because it forces you to consult your future self. It asks you to close your eyes and project yourself 5 years into the future. You're completely out of the industry. You're moving on. Maybe you're in a different career or starting a family. Now imagine that future version of you looking back at the decisions you're making today.
And the question isn't, did I make a lot of money?
No, the question is, does my future self respect this decision?
That is a heavy question to ask yourself.
It is very heavy. And the answer doesn't come from your logic brain. Your logic brain will try to justify it with numbers and spreadsheets. The answer comes from your nervous system. This is what the source calls the somatic test. Your body will tell you the answer before your brain does.
It actually gives us a little decoding ring for those physical feelings.
Right, so if you feel peace when you visualize the future, the decision is stable. You're aligned. If you feel ambivalence like a shrug, it's unstable and you probably haven't thought it through enough. But if you feel anxiety like a tightening in the chest, a pit in the stomach, a desire to look away when you think about your future self seeing this, that is a misalignment. That is your body screaming, don't do this.
And we ignore that signal at our own peril.
If you override that anxiety for money, that is the self-betrayal we talked about earlier. That is the very first crack in your architecture. That anxiety is your intuition telling you that the psychological price you're paying is way higher than the money you're making.
And you have to keep checking right. It's not just a one-time test you take at the beginning.
No, because of identity drift. Maybe you were totally fine 6 months ago. But today you notice you're more excited to talk to your subscribers than your real-life friends. Or you notice you're starting to overshare on the timeline. That's drift. The persona is eating the person. You have to catch that early and either reinforce your walls or execute your exit strategy immediately.
Okay, let's play devil's advocate for a minute.
Yeah.
Let's say someone listening to this builds the 3 pillars. They pass the somatic test. They have a strict exit strategy. What is the upside here? Why go through this absolute labyrinth of precautions?
The source is very balanced on this. It admits there are significant benefits if and only if the structure holds. Financial independence is the obvious one, but there are serious psychological benefits too. It lists increased comfort with embodiment.
Like feeling at home in your own skin.
Right, exactly. And another one is detachment from external judgment.
That one really caught my eye. Developing a thick skin, basically.
If you can navigate the adult industry and keep your self-respect intact, you become very difficult to shame. You realize that people's judgments are mostly just noise. You also develop strength and boundary skills. You become an absolute expert at saying no and defining exactly what you will and will not do. That is a superpower in literally any area of life.
But, and this is the final reality check of the deep dive, even if you do everything perfectly, The document lists structural consequences. And notice it doesn't call them punishments or failures. It just calls them consequences.
Because it's physics, not karma.
Hmm.
Even if you are the greatest architect in the world, if you build a house on the beach, it is going to get wet.
So what gets wet in this scenario? What are the unavoidable realities?
First is content leaks. It will happen. If it's digital, it can and will be copied. You have to accept that as a baseline fact, not a tragedy. If you can't handle a leak, do not create the file in the first place.
The second is social stigma.
It exists. People will judge you. You might lose friends. You might get uninvited from family events. That is a structural cost of the profession. You have to budget for that emotional loss, just like you budget for your taxes.
And the one that probably creates the most anxiety for people is future romantic partners.
This is a conversation you just have to be ready for. You might meet the love of your life in 5 years, and they might have a problem with your past. The document says this is a valid structural consequence. It doesn't mean you're damaged goods, but it does mean you have introduced a layer of complexity into your future relationships that simply wouldn't be there otherwise. You cannot demand that everyone else be perfectly cool with it just because you are.
And finally, there's a recalibration of sexuality.
This is subtle but profound. When you turn sex into a product, your brain changes how it categorizes it. It becomes transactional. It becomes work. You might find that in your private life, you're less interested, or it feels like a chore, or you start viewing your partner through a performative lens. The source warns that you will have to do active, conscious work to keep your private sexuality separate and sacred.
So as we wrap this up, the document basically leaves us with a checklist.
Yeah.
It feels very stoic. It's definitely not about just hoping for the best.
No hope is not a strategy here. The checklist is pretty clear. 1, you are not doing this from a place of insecurity. 2, you have built protective systems, legal, financial, and digital. 3, you monitor for identity drift constantly. 4, you accept digital permanence as a fact. And 5, you choose consciously, not reactively.
It all comes back to that one word, agency.
That is the word of the day. The source ends with this really powerful idea. No issues is fantasy. Managed impact with controlled growth is reality.
It reminds me of the difference between a child and an adult. A child climbs a tree hoping they won't fall. An adult climbs the tree knowing they might fall, so they check the branches first and they learn how to land.
That's the perfect takeaway. The wave is coming. The wave is the internet, the market, the judgment, the leaks. You can't stop the wave, but you can build a ship that doesn't sink.
And honestly, that's a lesson for all of us. Whether you're on OnlyFans or just posting on Twitter or managing a LinkedIn profile, we all need a little more architectural integrity. We all need to make sure we aren't outsourcing our self-worth to an algorithm. But it makes me wonder, with the way the digital economy is moving and AI blurring everything, how long is it going to be before regular white-collar workers need this exact same psychological architecture just to survive having a job online?
That is a terrifying and probably very accurate thought. We might all need to hard fork our identities soon.
Build your walls, check your foundations, and never sell your agency. Thanks for going on this deep dive with us. Go check your privacy settings, everyone. We'll see you next time.